You're tuning in to the Raised by Rentals program. This podcast will contain strong language and spoilers for decades-old media properties.
Join us.
Welcome, everybody. This is the podcast where we examine pop culture franchises of the VHS era and improv news stories, because life sucks. Get a fucking helmet to imagine how we might improve our favorite movies, TV, and games. I'm Josh.
I'm Mike.
And we were Raised by Rentals. Mike, have you ever been watching a movie or reading a book when something happens and your heart just sinks because you know that both you and the hero of the story are about to get a gut punch?
Oh, absolutely.
You know, it's like one of those things where a character enters the scene and you just immediately think, oh shit, they're not going to make it out of this alive, are they?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, I know that feeling all too well.
So I think that happens a lot in stories where there's elements that you can just immediately relate to, right? I mean, yes, characters can be built up over time, but what I was referring to is more of like, you know, when you have a character who comes on scene and it's like the best friend that you never heard of before who suddenly comes around and you're like, oh shit, like this guy's about to get killed or something, you know, or in a horror movie when, you know, like the bubbly girlfriend decides like, hey, everyone, we should like, you know, go drink by the lake or something. And you're like, oh, fuck. Okay. You're not going to be the final girl of this movie. You know?
You're not going to live to the next 20 minutes.
Right, exactly. And I think that in some cases it's even more severe, like when there's that trope called shoot the dog, where it's like sometimes in a movie a character has to make a really hard choice to do something, and it goes back to like when they had to like shoot Old Yeller for those of us who are old enough to remember that. And at a certain point in the movie you can sort of see where they're telegraphing it, and if you're paying attention you're like, oh no, oh shit, no, don't do that, please don't go there. You know, like,
right,
the dog doesn't need to get put down, oh my god. You know, and so I thought it would be kind of fun to tell an improv story for this week's episode, not based on a movie or any other pop culture property, but one of our original improv stories, another two-parter, just like the few that we did last year, and to focus our topic this time on one of these sort of trigger warning topics that can like make your heart clench up when you're watching a movie. By trigger warning, I mean, you probably know this, but something like, you know, suicide or child abuse, or one of these things that kind of triggers a response in you where, you know, you kind of pucker up and go, oh no, don't go there. Oh shit. You know, and some people, it can really, really trigger like a trauma reaction to the point where like they don't even want to see the movie.
right. I have plenty of movies like that I won't watch because I know it'll make me upset. So I totally get that.
I'm not here to try to, you know, make people upset. So if you're listening, like this is your trigger warning for this new two-part improv series we're going to be doing that I called the Trigger Warning Twin Bill, and I'm putting it right in the title so people know that there might be something upsetting happening. But when I said before that I thought it would be fun to play with this idea, not because I think it's fun to like, you know, fuck with people's trauma responses, but because I think it would be a fun challenge to take one of these trigger warning sort of topics or these things that really just make people like get the goosebumps or like, you know, crawl up in their chair and cover their eyes, but to do that as the lead into a story, but then take it somewhere more positive, or to sort of like work out the therapy of the character throughout the story. So the focus is not on, you know, this terrible thing that happened, but the focus is on like how the character's going to deal with it. And I can't help but think of a movie like John Wick, where it's this, spoiler alert, and I don't want to give too much away, but like this terrible thing happens toward the beginning of the movie, really two terrible things at the very beginning of the movie. And then you think the whole movie is just going to be about that, but really it becomes this sort of MacGuffin for a character who's going to go on like a holy crusade. And they sort of turn it around into this fun story that people really enjoy. And I think people enjoy it because of like, you know, the gratuitous violence of a movie like John Wick, but also because the whole time you're rooting for John Wick to go and get those motherfuckers.
Oh, hell yeah. A little quick side note, not to derail us right off the bat, but have you seen the meme about John Wick and Bill and Ted?
No, I haven't seen it. I'll have to look it up.
that John Wick is the alternate universe where Ted Theodore Logan went to military school. I was like, that's really damn funny. I like that.
I love when people do stuff like that. And we've done it a little bit in some of our episodes, but I love it when people take like different characters from different movies, all played by the same actor, and try to create some kind of a through line where like, how are these all the same character? You know?
Mhm.
Years ago, Patton Oswalt wrote this great short story. It's online, and I read it in one of his books because he's an amazing author, by the way, where he took all of William Zabka's characters from like Just One of the Guys and Karate Kid and Back to School, and he told a story about how they all were the same person. But holy shit, talk about a trigger warning. The ending of that story is fucked up.
Mhm.
Just Google it. Just Google it. And I'm sorry if you do. I apologize ahead of time. Trigger warning if you Google the Patton Oswalt story about William Zabka. But for this episode, we're going to get into another original improv, and it's going to be a follow-up to the two-parters that we did last year, where I get to pick a story idea, you get to pick a story idea, and we're going to riff on it. Now, last year we did the late night double feature picture show, where we each started with a pop culture prompt of sorts and went crazy. You know, you did the Venga Bus of Death, and I did Hot Garbage about the dumpster fire meme. And those were both a ton of fun that started in like weird places. And then we did the Fright for the Whole Family double pack, where we took these ideas for stories that we had years ago, like just these, snippets of ideas of, oh, wouldn't it be cool if there was a story about a zombie who had to look alive? And wouldn't it be cool if there was a story about a bunch of kids in a small town who were, trying to solve the mystery of like vampire murders in Suffer the Children? And we had so much fun doing those original stories, and I wanted to get back to it. So this time, the premise, as I've already mentioned, is kind of like, let's take sort of a trigger warning of some kind and kind of work it into a story where we can, kind of work out the trauma therapy of that, but also to more specifically take an idea for a story. And let me just say before I've even finished that sentence that when it's your turn, like, you're not beholden to any of this, but I wanted to go first because I specifically had this idea to take a story that I had worked on. So it's sort of the opposite of my Look Alive, where it was just like an idea for a story that I never did anything with. This is a story that I've actually worked on a lot, that I was working out as a graphic novel script. And like, I have all the characters and the plot and the backstory and even like some sequel ideas sketched out. But for some reason, I just never finished it. But I really want to, and I have some kind of a writer's block. So I thought it would be fun to just say, you know what, fuck it. Let's just take it to the podcast, put it out in the world, let people know the idea. I think it's a great idea. And instead of trying to tell the story that I was writing a graphic novel about, you and I just take the concept and just do a completely original, brand new story based on that same pitch.
Okie doke.
I hope you're on board because I know I've been keeping you in the dark for the past couple of weeks. I mentioned it briefly on our last episode. So my idea is to take one of these trigger warnings, but also to wrap it up in sort of like a rule, like one of these unspoken rules that you want to follow when you tell a good story. Rules like, avoid Deus Ex Machina, right? Avoid tired tropes like the damsel in distress. Don't put women in refrigerators, which we can talk about a little bit if I need to. And most importantly, and this is the title of the story for today, never kill the dog.
Okay. I agree, because that's something we say on the Boogeyman's Closet all the time.
Right. In fact, I might have even gotten it from you because this story originally had a different title. It was originally called Next Door, which you may remember me talking about at some point.
Vaguely, yes.
Yeah. And the sequel idea I had for it is called Blood Red Summer. And I'm just saying that on the podcast, putting in the world, saying those are the titles I'm going to use. But I've changed Next Door to Never Kill the Dog, probably from the Boogeyman's Closet being an influence in the back of my head. But the idea of this story is to tell a 90s slasher story about a kid who witnesses a slasher character who doesn't kill humans, who kills dogs. And what does this kid do about it when he's the only one who knows who's killing the dogs?
Okay. This is interesting. Okay.
So again, the idea here is that it's a slasher story, and a classic horror slasher story, but instead of a killer who kills humans, he's a dog slasher, which it's a fucked up thing to have in a story, but I hope it would be the kind of thing that would elicit like enough of an emotional response that people would be on board with our teenage main character, Abel. What kind of a story can we tell about a teenage kid who is trying to find or hunt this slasher of dogs in his town? Before I get into any more detail, what are you thinking so far?
The first thing that popped into my head is a movie called I Am Not a Serial Killer, where a kid in a small town kind of realizes that someone in the town is killing people, and kind of fingers it's Christopher Lloyd, like the old man Christopher Lloyd, and it doesn't turn out to be what he thinks is happening. I don't want to ruin it because it is a really good movie, and it turns out to be completely different than what he expected. So that was the first thing I was thinking of, just the whole kid in a small town realizing there's a killer in some way. But yeah, I this is gonna take a minute to figure out.
Yeah, and I get that, right? I think this is an improv challenge in the truest sense, in that, I have this idea. I know what I wanted to do with it, but I'm going to try really hard to not just drive the story down this plot that I already came up with, because I think it would be fun to put our heads together and see if we can do something else. And, slasher stories are always fun, but they can also be a little bit problematic because they've all been done before. I already mentioned John Wick, which is famously based on the fact that, there's a character who, has a dog and then wants to go on this like revenge mission, not only for the dog, but for, his wife as well, I think, just to kind of like work out his own grief and depression. But I had this idea years ago, and where the story originally came from was me just trying to think of like what would make for an interesting slasher if I were to come up with my own. And I'd come up with a couple over time. We came up with a fun one a couple of months ago in our Flapjack Massacre episode. But that was really Michael May's idea. And I feel like the slasher who goes around just randomly killing campers or kids or partying teenagers or whatever has kind of been done before. And while I don't want to glorify, violence against animals, I feel like this is like a pretty horrific setup for a character. So the way that I picture the story starting, or the setup for the story that we can start, is small town America. Not too small of a town, small enough where there's enough dogs, that are maybe outside in their yards that, somebody could have access to murder them, but not so big that, our main character, Abel, couldn't get around and find somebody and kind of know the lay of the land, right?
Right.
So suburban America, or small town, small city in America, and the town is kind of on alert because somebody has been killing household pets. And what we find out is that there have been dogs who have been discovered, who have been bludgeoned, like, smashed on the head, discovered by their poor owners, in the front yard, left out for all to see. And so the town is kind of on alert. There's notices out about not leaving your dogs out overnight, keeping the dogs on leashes, being careful not to take dogs on walks after a certain time of night, that sort of a thing. And that's just sort of like the setup where we start for that situation. And I'll say, I do not actually know who the slasher person is. Even in the story that I wrote, I specifically did not identify this character because I wanted it to be mysterious, even to myself, to sort of discover as I wrote. So as I stand here, our slasher character is only referred to as Dog Hammer.
I'm sorry, that's just a funny name. Dog Hammer.
I think it's a great name.
Oh, no, it's awesome. It kind of sounds like a wrestler.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking that they always give serial killers weird nicknames in the news, right? Like Buffalo Bill and the Tooth 100%. Fairy, to name the two examples from the Thomas Harris novels, because I recently watched Red Dragon.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But serial killers always have sort of like weird nicknames. And so to me, the nickname here for somebody who is, bludgeoning dogs to death is the Dog Hammer. The focus on Abel as the main character, again, I don't want to go through everything that I came up with, but the sketch for this guy is that he's like 15, 16 years old, maybe a freshman in high school, and he has a pet dog. We can call the dog whatever you want, but in my story, I had called his dog Yeti. And, he's like a husky or something of that nature. And so it's like a boy and his dog, but Abel has a bad home life. Abel doesn't ever like being at home. And again, I don't know that I necessarily want to go through all the details because we can work it out amongst ourselves, but Abel doesn't like being at home. He tries to not be at home with his parents as much as possible. And so he spends a lot of time, I guess you would call it like urban camping or stealth camping. He's
Hmm.
got like a tree house or something in his backyard where he goes out there and he sleeps out there sometimes. And then that kind of turns into, he's going to run away from home, not like permanently, but like I got to get out of here. And he's going to run off and, he's going to tent out in his like neighbor's backyard or sleep under his friend's porch or, whatever. So maybe he's sleeping in the woods, that sort of thing. So him and Yeti are kind of on their own a lot, out there urban camping. And at one of these times when he's out there by himself in the middle of the night, he hears a dog barking. The dog is barking, yap, 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 yap. He knows that there's something going on with somebody killing dogs. So, he goes to check it out, whether he's going to warn the owner or find the dog or whatever. Like he goes to check out where is the dog barking coming from. And when he gets there, he sees Doghammer there with his big giant 3-pound ball peen hammer come crashing down on the poor neighbor's dog right when Abel shows up.
Oof.
And what does Abel do about it? That's where the story starts.
Okay. Well, I mean, initial knee-jerk reaction would be like if I were to come up on that, I think I'd fucking run. Just because it's like, okay, there's a crazy dude with a hammer murdering a dog. Like if I'm assuming at that point the dog would be dead,
Yeah.
getting hit in the head with a hammer like that. So yeah, I would probably run for my life with my dog, trying to get the fuck out of there.
Yeah, so there you go. So that's the start of our story, and I think let's see if we can like improv through this to figure out what happens now. But also, we can back up if we need to talk about Abel's like home life a little bit. But yeah, I think that's the most obvious reaction. Abel runs off, but then what? Does the dog hammer guy chase him? Does he just run away and that's it? Does he try to tell somebody? I think these are the things that we kind of need to solve.
Well, I think we should lay out like what kind of person Abel is. So we know he doesn't want to be at home. Like clearly he seems to be a loner, doesn't have many friends. So maybe the home life situation, I know the stereotype is to go with the abusive, drunk, distant parents, but maybe it's something as simple as like, he comes from a divorced home where maybe whatever parent he's living with, whether it's mom or dad, is working constantly. Like maybe they got to work 2 jobs just to put, like keep a roof over their heads. So he's often left alone to his own devices. And maybe because he doesn't have a lot of friends other than his dog, he's always like making up tall tales. Like, I saw, I don't know, like what era is this going to take place in? Like the 80s or 90s or
In the 90s, yeah. I planned it just because in my version of the story, there is a sequel that happens in the modern day. So this was actually the first story is kind of a prequel to that. But yeah, it could be whatever
okay.
we want. But for me, it's the 90s.
So yeah, so like maybe he's always making up stories like I was at the mall and I saw Mick Foley shopping for socks, like he's that type of guy. He's always making up tall tales to try to like get attention because he comes from a home where no one pays attention to him. He's an only child, mom and dad are separated, maybe he lives with his mom, she's never home, like she works, maybe she works like an office job and then like she's a night nurse or going to night school or something like that. So it's like she's constantly working and he's often left to his own devices. So he's just making up tall tales to get attention. So when he witnesses something like this and he tries to tell people about
Oh,
it, no one's going to believe this. Everyone's going to be like, yeah, okay. Or even worse, maybe they're going to look at him and be like, do you think he's the one doing it? That fucking weirdo kid that's always sleeping in the woods? Like it could be something along those lines. So then it's not just the how do I stop this, villain from murdering all the pets in the neighborhood, but also, how do you do that without making yourself suspicious?
yeah, that's awesome. I actually did not think about the first one of those, the cry wolf aspect, when I was doing my version, which is great. I think this is exactly what I wanted to do. Like, let's go in a different direction. I think we could do both of those things because if we're in a small town, we kind of need to populate the town and the story a little bit. I don't want to get too far into the what ifs, but we could do that thing where we have Abel encounter people in town who could maybe be the killer, like maybe it's somebody he knows, just to kind of give the audience someone to think about or guess about. But I really like this idea where there are some people who think maybe it's actually him, but also some people who just don't believe him at all and that he's just crying wolf. And that puts us in the perfect scenario, especially for a 90s movie where you have a kid with no parents who has to like save the day all by himself, you know?
Mm-hmm. Very much a 90s trope.
Yeah, no, I think that that's just good. I like the idea of, and again, this wasn't in my original story. I like the idea of his mom being in like night school or like she's not around much, so it's just him at home with a dad that he doesn't get along with. I don't know if the dad's abusive or if he's strict, like maybe military strict, and just thinks that Abel is like wasting his time and wasting his life out there like fucking around in the woods. Maybe Abel's got like long hair and he wears ripped up jeans and doesn't give a shit about how he dresses or how often he showers, because he's like he just likes being out in the wilderness, like he'd be these days he would be like a survivalist, but back then I don't know if that was really like a thing that teenage kids knew about, right? Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. I think it helps us to do this setup where he could be out by himself in the middle of the night to catch Doghammer in the action. Yeah, that name Doghammer is it's one of the reasons why I like this idea so much and why I've always wanted to tell the story, because I'm like, I just want to tell a story about a guy called Doghammer.
Right. Doghammer.
It's hard to come up with like a slasher character, so I like mine.
Right. No, I totally agree, because I've definitely tried to come up with slasher characters before. It's hard. So like with the dad, I almost say we probably shouldn't fall back on the abusive, strict dad trope, only because like just to kind of change it up a bit. You'd mentioned the military. What if his dad like died in the military? Like maybe like he was a little kid and his dad served in like Desert Storm and died.
Okay.
So it's like, so growing up without a father figure, mom is doing everything she can to like put food on the table, keep roof over her head or roof over their heads. Like, she's not an absent parent on purpose. It's more or less like she's on her own and she's doing her best to try to, provide as best as she can for them, while he's just like off gallivanting around the woods because he's got nobody else watching him. So it's more or less like the loner aspect than the abused kid aspect. That's kind of what I was thinking. But I mean, it's obviously it's your story, so I don't want to.
No, it's our story now. No, I like it. I think I like the loner kid, and I like the idea that it's more of trauma of loss, and I think that would play into things later on in the story, especially when you have like a pet that is lost or some other person that gets killed. Like let's start the story where Abel feels like he has these missing pieces in his life. He's grieving. I like this idea. His dad was in Desert Storm or whatever. It's been a couple of years, and these are his formative years. He's like, I don't know, 15 or something, and this is when he's starting high school, and his dad should be teach him how to drive pretty soon and teach him how to be a man. But instead his dad's not there, and his poor mom has to work 2 jobs. She's not around. He's at home by himself a lot, which is him and Yeti. But what if in the house there's like pictures of his dad? So we can have this scene, and I'm gonna pause for a second to say, like, I think we can back up and kind of like lay out the opening to this. But in that sequence where we introduce this character, we should have this scene where his mom goes off to work like she does at the night shift at the hotel where she's a maid or that works the front desk or whatever, and he's home alone and he's in the house, and he's like bored. He doesn't watch TV, like he's not that kind of a kid, and he sees a picture of his dad like over like the fireplace, and then he turns and there's another picture of his dad and his mom like laughing at like Christmas when he was younger, and it's like he's surrounded by these pictures of his dad who he misses, and there's no one around to help him. He doesn't have any friends because he's the weird loner kid. His mom's not around, and so he doesn't want to be home. He's not leaving the house because he's running away from an abusive situation. He's leaving the house because like his dad's ghost is there, so he doesn't want to be there.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, and plus the fact that he's, like I said, the whole growing up without a dad thing and being the weird loner, like anything he says is gonna seem kind of suspect, like he's that kid that's always making up tall tales. So I think this is gonna work out well.
Yeah, absolutely. And okay, so I'm glad you're on board. I know it was a little bit weird at first because I was like, hey, I have this idea and I know the whole story. You don't know anything.
Right.
I think it's starting to click already again, because based on what we've already talked about, this has to be a different story than what I originally came up with, because this is a different character, right? And so I'm totally happy with this. So let's back up, and I don't want to go through every scene in exhaustive detail, but what I'm picturing in my head, if this were a movie, we have to like introduce Abel, but kind of get to the point of the slasher as well. Like, I don't want to spend too much time like fucking around before we get to see, the brutality. So it could be something like we open up on, maybe there's like dogs barking, and Abel is like, he opens his eyes and the sun is like, shining through like a crack in like a makeshift canvas tent he made, and he sits up, and Yeti is with him, and he hears some other dog is barking, and like you hear the birds chirping. It's like it's morning, and he's like getting up all groggy because he was probably up late, and he heads off like into town, and maybe some random neighbor is like, hey, shouldn't you be in school, Abel? Like, it's like 10 o'clock. Like, what are you doing? And then Abel just immediately has like a story that he tells, kind of like the girl in Jumanji, who's just constantly like making up stories,
Oh,
And
yeah.
so he just has some remark like, you wouldn't believe it, Mr. Stevenson. There was like a fire in the old mine, and I had to like go save some orphans. And he's like, yeah, whatever. Get the fuck out of here. Go to school. Whatever. Maybe he wouldn't swear at him, but he'd be like, yeah, oh, Abel, always with your stories, And then
Right.
like maybe he heads off, and he sees like the crossing guard or the traffic cop or whatever in this small town, and of course the guy's gonna look at his watch and be like, he starts walking toward Abel all fast, like this this traffic cop guy, and Abel's like, oh shit, I'm supposed to be at school, and he like he like takes off with Yeti, and maybe you could tell he's kind of like a kid who gets into trouble. Like, he runs down an alleyway, maybe he like bumps into somebody who was like smoking a cigarette behind a store, and same thing. They're like, oh, like, Abel, go home. Your mom's working the morning shift right now. If she catches your ass, you're going to be in trouble, whatever. Like, we kind of have these little character moments where we get to find out that Abel, he makes up stories. He's never at home. His mom's working like the morning shift at the diner. He doesn't go to school. He clearly doesn't have any supervision, while he's just like, maybe he's like skateboarding around town with his like ripped like blood-stained white t-shirt, like hair full of sticks, while with his husky dog chasing after him. Like, I think that's a cool image.
I totally agree. 100%.
Yeah, so we can have him. Maybe he goes to school again. We have some interactions. Maybe he gets in trouble for being late. He makes up some crazy story like, oh, like my uncle went down in this like helicopter crash or whatever. Like, he makes up these, like, everybody knows that they're just silly stories, and that's just part of what Abel does. But because he's living in this like fantasy world and doesn't give a shit about the real world. And
right.
Yeah, at some point we get him home, and this is where, or maybe when he's at school, one of his friends can be like, "Oh, dude, did you see in the paper there was another like dog that got killed?" And maybe he sees a picture of, and he sees the name, and he's like, "Oh my god, like that was Susie's dad's Great Dane or whatever." Like, it's like he knows the dog, which I think is another good character moment, that Abel knows the dogs in town because he's always like hanging out, like camping in people's yards and shit,
Right.
So we can kind of have a little moment like that where we find out a little bit more about Abel. We find out that like maybe his friend that he bumps into is like, oh my god, it's like it's like the fifth one this month. Like, that's crazy. Like, did you hear that? They're giving us like the mayor has a curfew on pets being outside now. Like, I've never heard of such a thing. Whatever. Like, we kind of lay the scene.
I think so. Yes, I love the idea of him telling multiple stories throughout. So, we'll do the thing like you said with the crossing guard, where it's like, hey, shouldn't you be at school? That whole thing, and be like, hey, maybe it could be something like, oh, sorry, my alarm didn't go off. Like, start off small, right? And then like as he gets more and more people, the lie gets bigger, so we can kind of watch as Abel tells these tall tales. So it's like it starts off like something normal, because we've all used that, like, oh shit, I overslept.
Yeah, exactly.
How many times have you been a couple minutes late getting somewhere, and it's like, you didn't really oversleep. Maybe you were just taking a little bit too long to get going in the morning, that type of thing. Hell, I've done that recently, where it was like, I was watching TV, lost track of time, looked down at my watch, realized, oh shit, it's 10 minutes later than I thought it was. I should have already left, and hopped in my car, and I made it to work, but like I was 2 minutes late. Oh, sorry, I overslept. It's a stupid excuse. It's a lie, obviously, but it's a common one. So we have him do that type of thing. Like, oh, I overslept. I'm heading there now. And then when he gets to school, maybe it could be something like, didn't you hear there was like a bank robbery? I couldn't get here. Like, police weren't letting people down, Main Street, like
Yeah.
something like that. And then when it gets like into class, be like, I got interviewed because I witnessed a bank robbery, like it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And everyone's like, yeah, okay, kid. And we as the audience could see, like, clearly this kid's just making up stories.
I'm sorry. I got to jump in.
Go for it.
Because I have to, because it ties into the whole theme of the dogs. It would be funny if, like, yeah, throughout the school day, he's like, this lie is getting bigger and bigger, and you're like meeting other people, and he's finding out about like the dogs getting killed, and then like, what if we end it with, he goes to class, and one of the teachers is like, why were you late? And he tells another one of these tall tales, and then she's like, well, I don't suppose you have your homework to turn in, and that's when maybe he like looks over at the window and he sees his dog Yeti like looking in the window of the school, all happy, panting, waiting for him, and then have him say something like, I don't suppose you believe my dog ate it.
Perfect. Yes.
And we smash cut to him like getting home from school. He's looking kind of bummed, not like super sad because he doesn't give a shit about school, but he's sad because now he has this paper that his mom has to sign because he like gets in detention for being late and not having homework and lying so much. So
we do all that, we play that out, but we have the tension of like maybe like outside the front door, like he holds up the paper and kind of sighs like, oh, like mom's gonna kill me type of thing, and he goes in and maybe there's like a note on the counter with like a 20 that's like, had to go into work early, love you, sweetie, here's money for a pizza type of thing. So even though he was like dreading having his mom sign it, she's not there. He's home alone again.
that's perfect. Yeah, that's even better than I was going to say. I was going to say have her like running out the door while he was getting there. Like he's looking forward to seeing her and he only gets like a second while she's like rushing to work. But I like it better that she's just not there at all, like just completely absent. And so, yeah, he's bummed because he was afraid to come home. And maybe because his mom's the only person that he cares about, like telling these lies to. And I don't know how much of that's going to be translated here, but like that's kind of where I'm thinking his brain is. His mom's the only person that he doesn't like live in this fantasy world with, but she's never fucking around. And
Right.
yeah, so he goes in the house, and then we have this moment, this sort of silent scene where he reads the note, he sighs, he like throws it down. He looks around. Maybe he looks in the fridge and he sees whatever she made for dinner in the oven or whatever she put it, and it's like something that looks gross. And then he like sees a picture of his dad and his mom at like Halloween, looking all happy. And then he sees a picture of his dad in like his dress uniform, like above the mantle. And he doesn't even have to say anything, or maybe he talks to Yeti and he's just like, screw this, let's get out of here. And and they take off, and maybe he has this like little like shanty shack that he has built up in some woods, like down a hill and like over a creek behind his house, and you can tell he goes there a lot. Like we can kind of set the scene there.
So yeah, so we do the note thing, like you said. He just grabs a bag, packs it real quick, and then he's like, come on, Yeti, and then they head off to the woods. And we could show his little like hidey hole, where he's got like this, you had mentioned like the little tent that he had made, and maybe he's got like comic books, couple of Bowie mags. he is a teenage
Yeah, right.
boy in the woods after all. I'm sure Johnny Fappleseed made a visit.
Right.
But to mention Count Creepyhead. But yeah, so like we hear about that, and then this is where we could do like that night we could do the thing where he witnesses the murder of the first dog. So like maybe he's out there, he's reading comic books and like I don't know, eating cookies or something. Like he's got like a half-eaten bag of Oreos, just sitting there like munching them, reading comic books by like one of those, like, remember the little keychain squeezy flashlights that were big in the
Yeah.
90s?
Yeah,
He's
for sure.
got one of those with like the little silver chain hanging off of it, and he's reading like Maximum Carnage or something that was very 90s. And then like his dog could maybe his dog like perks up and like looks, that like confused like dog look. And he's like, Yeti, calm down. And then the dog, maybe his dog starts barking or growling. And then he hears like a dog barking, in the distance. And then suddenly they yelp. And then have him be like, what the hell was that? And then like he gets Yeti and they go out and look. And maybe this is where, he comes up to like, I'm imagining like the woods being kind of behind the neighborhood. So like, you have that like suburban street with like the little cul-de-sac. And then like, the backyards of everybody that's well maintained and well mown and got the little like picket fence and all that. And then like right beyond that you got like the tall grass field leading into the woods is kind of what
Yep.
how I'm kind of picturing the layout. So you
Yep.
have him like maybe he walks to the edge of the woods and he sees like it's the backyard of the Thompsons' house or something like that, and you just see this shadowy figure just pummeling their dog with that hammer.
Oh yeah, brutal. Yeah, no, I like this. Let me back up just for a second. I want to put
Yeah, yeah.
one more little tiny little detail in, just because we had kind of mentioned like it's a slasher story. You gotta like throw people a couple of red herrings, right? So yeah, as he's going out to his like little hidey place in the woods, his little like camp, maybe he gets there and he's startled just for a second, just so the audience has a brief little startle of like there's somebody there, there's a guy there with a dog, another like little, maybe it's like a little like ugly little Scotty dog with like those like eyes that go in like two different directions, you know, and
Yep.
one of those
They
like
always
goofy
have
little dogs you see on memes where like, it's like the ugliest dog in the world.
they always have the dirty muzzle fur. You know,
Yeah.
like the fur around their mouth and nose is always like stained brown.
Oh God, yeah, right. Like they're eating out of like bean cans or something. But that's what I'm thinking is like, so you know, he gets startled for a second, and he's just like, "Ah, fucking Rooney, man! I told you not to scare me like that." And it's like the local homeless guy who has his like little dog, and he's, you know, and Rooney is just like, "Oh man, sorry, man. I figured you'd still be at school. I didn't think you'd mind. I was just like, you know, taking a nap." And you know, he kind of like, you know, they talk for a second, and he kind of shoos him off, and then you know, maybe Abel's like, "Hey, did you hear about this like dog killer guy? Like, what's going on with that?" You know, and whatever. They just have a little reaction or interaction, and then like Rooney takes off with his little Scotty dog, just to kind of put someone else in the story. Like, is it this guy? You know, and maybe we could do that with a few more characters along the way. And then exactly what you said, you know, he's chilling, reading comics. He hears the barking. Like, of course, it's nighttime. Maybe it's like midnight or whatever. And yeah, I always picture him in my head of like, he comes out of the woods, there's this tall grass, and maybe he climbs into like a tree or like one of these big like bushes, and so he's sort of like peeking through the branches, and yeah, he sees this, you know, this figure like just giving the last bloody blow to this dog, and maybe, I don't know if it's easy for him to be talking to the audience because he has Yeti with him, so he can maybe say to Yeti like, "Oh my God, like, you know, that's Slacker, like, you know, the Thompson's pit bull or whatever." And I'm just
Right.
just making this up, you know. And then maybe that little whisper is like, you see this dark figure's back stiffens, and he just barely turns his head, and then he just like quickly walks in the other direction, like off, you know, down the dark sidewalk. Like, wait, did he hear it? Did he not hear that? Like, what was that? You know,
God. Oh,
like
that's
just
creepy.
a little bit of suspense, so Abel isn't just going to immediately run out and like, you know, maybe he would confront him or whatever. Like, you know, he's pissing himself just a little bit. You know. Yeah, and I think from here we can maybe cut to the next day, and again he's telling tall tales, so I haven't immediately, you know, figured out all these skits here, but it could be, you know, maybe he tries to tell his friend, maybe he runs into Rooney and he's like, "Oh dude, I saw that like, you know, dog hammer guy from the paper," and whatever he's telling people, and of course, you know, no one's gonna believe him because they're like, yeah, right, whatever.
Well, if okay, let's say this is pretty late at night that this happens. Like maybe it's like 11 o'clock at night, or a time where people like pedestrians aren't really walking around a suburban neighborhood. Something like a little just off.
Hmm.
And then like, yeah, so he witnesses it. We have the moment where the guy like turns and looks and is just like kind of runs off in the other direction. So it's that intense moment. What if Abel tries to go and tell the cops? Like,
Okay.
what if he like he's just like, "Oh my God," like he like walks up to like maybe the back of the fence and looks in the yard and just sees the bloody mess, and then like runs, like maybe we like smash cut to like Abel coming in the front door of the police station, and he's like, "I saw him, I saw the dog hammer," like just kind of, and have like the cop at the desk be like, "Jesus Christ, kid, another story," like, and have this scene where the cops have heard his tall tales before. Like
Yeah.
anytime there's something like, the local jeweler had a thievery, like something like,
Hmm.
he's always like, "I saw him, I know who did it." So like the cops are just like, this kid, like we could even do the thing, what was it, oh God, was it Goonies with Chunk?
Yeah, I was just waiting for just waiting for you to like take a breath so I could jump in with that. Like, oh yeah, it's like Chunk when
Yeah,
he tries to call the cops and tell them about the Fratellis, and then the cops like, is that you, Lawrence? And he's like,
yes,
and
yes.
he's like, oh, that's just like the time that blah 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 blah. It's like there was like Iranian terrorists or whatever he says. It's like, yeah,
Exactly. So it's like that type of scene, but like maybe it could be one of those things where like he freaks out, he's trying to tell the cops, the cop like you see the cop behind the counter, and like maybe there's I don't know, some person is standing there at the front like complaining about something completely random, like I saw kids spray painting on the back of the five and dime, something stupid, and he's just like, hold on a second. He goes around the counter and sits down with Abel and Yeti, and he's like, look, kid, you gotta stop. There's real shit going on. He goes, and not for nothing, but that's a real sicko out there. It's not something to joke about.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm not joking. I really saw it. Like, go to the Thompsons' yard and check it out. And maybe this cop actually does. Like, maybe they find out, like, oh shit, this dog actually was killed. But that kind of puts Abel on the suspect list.
Yeah, exactly. Where they're like, okay, like, so you weren't lying this time, but like, why are you out here at 1 a.m. and how did you know about this? Like, he says the dog's name, so maybe the cops are like, the dog's name, where he lives. Like, is this you? Is this you're seeking attention or something again? It's like I can't think of the exact dialogue off the top of my head, but it's like, yeah, I like that they sort of turn their suspicion to him, like, okay, you're not lying, but why are you telling us about this? Like, why did you do this?
Right. Maybe okay. So how about like I like this idea. So yeah. So he talks to Abel, and maybe he like pats Yeti on the head, and he's like, "Look, kid." He's like, "Go home." It's like, "I'll call the Thompsons. Don't worry about it. Like I'll look in on it." He's like, "No, really. Like he's out there. He's out. I swear to God, I saw him." And I was like, "What did he look like?" Well, it was dark, and I didn't really get a good look. And now this is where the story starts to break down and falls more into line of like Chunk telling the tall tales to the cops. So the cop just kind of nods and like waves his hand like, okay, Abel, go home, get some sleep. I'll look into it. I promise. I'll look into it. And Abel he kind of like does the like hands in the jacket pockets, kicks dirt, kind of like, oh, gee whiz, and like heads home type of thing.
Yeah.
And maybe, the cop goes back around the desk, like he shakes his head like, oh, this kid, starts talking to the person that was there making another complaint, and then they get a phone call. And he's like, like, oh, Mrs. Thompson, I was just actually about to check in on you guys, and have him be like, wait, your dog's dead. Like, he hears the story firsthand. And then maybe he turns to like, maybe like the chief or somebody else. I don't know who else would be working at that hour, but he turns to somebody else and he's like, I hate to say this, but keep an eye on Abel. Like maybe it's one of those things where it's like, it's reluctant because they know the kid's scenario. They know he's just, a kid, telling tall tales and kind of like lonely. He's a loner, that whole thing. Mom's very distant because she's so overworked and so overburdened with the hand life has dealt her. Like almost like the town kind of feels bad for the two of them.
Yeah. Okay.
But now like the cop is like, shit, we got to keep an eye on this kid.
Yeah, no, I like that. That's cool. I think we should cut to the next day, and we kind of do the same thing again. Where we see Abel kind of going through his day. Maybe it's like more of a montage this time, but now he's like not as like irreverent, not as excited. Maybe he's getting like yelled at school, but all he can do is like stare out the window, and he's sort of thinking like, oh shit, like what did I see? Like what am I gonna do about it? Like should I do something about it? Like these are kind of the thoughts that are going through his head. Or maybe we just actually see him like leave school and he's walking down the sidewalk with Yeti and he's just talking to Yeti like, what do you think we should do, Yeti? Like they didn't believe me. Like should I tell Mom? I mean, she's never around. I'm not even sure what job she's working today. And
right.
Yeti's kind of the sounding board so we can hear Abel's inner thoughts. So I'm going to throw another character in here again, just because I keep thinking of like, let's have some more red herrings. We had this Rooney guy, we had Abel himself. And so one of the characters that I had in the original version of this story, which again, now it doesn't work at all to be the same character, but just as someone else to put in here. So in my original version of the story, Abel had an aunt who was sort of this middle-aged sort of butch lady, kind of obviously like the elder lesbian in town, but they never really talk about it much, right? So instead of it
Yep.
being his aunt, let's just have it be like another person who lives in the neighborhood. So he's walking on the sidewalk with Yeti, kind of heading outside of town, or outside the normal like suburban neighborhood. And there's always like that one house in every neighborhood that was like there before they built the suburban sprawl, and that person's never going to sell out, and it's this like old ass house with like all kinds of shit in the yard and like 3 rusty cars parked out back, and it's like the HOA just thinks it's a fucking eyesore, but they can't get rid of this person because they've had the house for 100 years or whatever. And
Right.
so Abel heads over to this place, and he's maybe there's another dog there. Like there's a dog that runs out, like a real big motherfucking dog, like a mastiff or something that runs out, and they're like, oh hey Zeus, like where's Frankie? And he finds that this lady Frankie that lives at this house is in like the back of the house. I don't know if it's a fence or maybe it's a shed or a garage or something, but in the back of the house, and she's like cleaning a deer that she killed, right? She's a hunter.
Okay.
And so while she's out there, and maybe she has like she's a bow hunter or something, she has some kind of weapons there that we can maybe use later on in the story, right? Or maybe it's I don't know, like I'm trying to think what people hunt with besides rifles. Bow and arrow is the only thing I can really think of. But my point being, having a character who
other than gun, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, my idea is having a character who is big enough, but also like clearly not not too squeamish around like blood and dead animals, because they're like cleaning a deer, and maybe Abel's just asking Frankie for advice, like, oh hey Frankie, like do you ever worry about like Zeus being out by himself off the leash? And she's like, oh, he's a tough motherfucker like me, like fucking dog hammer with a silly ass name is gonna come over here and fuck with us, whatever.
Right.
Like she's a tough old bitch. And but he kind of goes to her for advice, because she, like him, is kind of like living on her own, but for her it's because she's just this sort of like country hunter lady who's been living there forever before they built all these pretty little houses in a row.
Right. Yeah, no, she's the old town lesbian in the 90s. I'm sure that's
Yeah.
that's not going to be spoken about.
Yeah,
only in
exactly.
hushed tones type of thing.
Totally.
That back then that was still, a little taboo.
Yeah, exactly. But my idea is that, again, take Frankie and Rooney and Abel, and we're kind of building this cast of like outcasts, and it could be any of them. And of course, we know it's not Abel, but like the cops don't,
Right.
But anyway, so yeah, we can have just to have Abel again have like a sounding board, and maybe Frankie gives him an idea. Maybe she says something like, like, well, what are you gonna do? Like, do you want to catch this guy? Do you want to like you figure out who it is? Do you want to like stay away? Like, just ask him point blank, like, what's your intention here? And then maybe have Abel to be like, I just want to stop him from killing any more dogs. Like, that's fucking evil or whatever.
Right.
And she's like, okay, well, if you want to stop him, like, I guess you got to catch him. You saw him before. Do you think you could see him again? And that's really all she kind of has to say. And then Abel's a smart guy, so we can maybe do a little montage or something where it's like he's gonna set up in the woods somewhere and spy on the neighborhood. Like maybe he's up in a tree, and he builds a little like hunter's blind out of whatever little canvas and random tent poles and shit that he has, and he's got some binoculars, and he's gonna have him a bag of like old school Doritos and Pepsi in the old 90s can, and he's gonna like hang out in like the woods with his or up in a tree with his binoculars, like waiting for like the killer to come out again.
Mm-hmm. This is just an idea, and you said something in particular that kind of made me raise an eyebrow. You had said like that we know Abel's not the killer, but the cops don't. What if we have a couple of like scenarios where Abel is like watching something and imagining what could happen, but then we see that's not really what happened? So almost make it like, can we trust Abel's point of view? Like, because he's always telling tall tales, maybe his imagination's getting away with him. That type of a thing.
Oh yeah, like actually make him a real red herring.
Right. So
I like that.
Here's what I'm thinking. So he goes, maybe I'm sorry. Oh my God, I already forgot her name. What was the hunter lady's name?
Frankie.
Frankie, thank you. I don't know why I wanted to say Lisa. I was like, that's not it at all, but that was stuck in my head. So Frankie. So maybe he goes and he talks to Frankie. He's like, have you heard the news about the dog hammer and all that? And her like, oh yeah, that pussy with that kind of name, they're like says something like, making fun of him, and have him be like, I saw, I saw him kill the Thompson's dog last night, but no one will believe me. The cops didn't believe me. And maybe she like puts her hand on his shoulder and she's like, kid, I love you, but even I have trouble believing you sometimes.
Nice.
One of those things like where even she doesn't really believe what he's saying there. Like he literally just said like, I saw this dog get murdered, and she's just like, okay, there, kid, like that type of thing. So we can see that like he's done this enough where even the people that care about him are kind of just like, really, really, Abel, like, okay, enough. That type of an attitude. But I love this thing where you have, because this would also make sense for her to say something like, well, if you saw him before, maybe you can see him again. Maybe you can catch him. That type, like,
Yeah.
it's almost dismissive, almost like, she doesn't want to like not believe the kid, but she can't help it because he tells so many tall tales.
Yeah, no, that's good.
So yeah, we do the whole thing where you're saying like he gets out in the woods, and it's like we do that like the 80s gearing up montage, or the 90s gearing up montage in this case, where he grabs like the backpack. We see him throw the bag of Doritos, the can of Pepsi, like the flashlight. Maybe there's like a box of like ouchless band-aids or something, like a bunch of like silly shit in there, and then it's like throws it all together, and we see him sitting in a tree, like in the woods with his binoculars, like munching on the Doritos and drinking the Pepsi, and like, Yeti's sleeping at the base of the tree underneath him, and he's just kind of watching the neighborhood, and then maybe we could even have like, this is like dusk, like let's say it's not quite nighttime, people are still out and about milling in their backyards, and he's like looking, and like we looking through the one binocular, or like the one house, and we see like a group of like maybe like a couple siblings, like a little brother and sister playing in the backyard while like dad is grilling burgers or something. And then like in the next backyard, we just see like a couple, like an older couple, like drinking mojitos and reading their book and on the back patio type of thing. He's like going through like house by house, looking at the different houses. And then maybe like he sees what looks like just an average, family talking, just kind of, can't hear what they're saying, obviously. But then like the one dude just like does something crazy, like pulls out a gun and shoots somebody, and Abel's like, oh my God, and then looks back again, and none of that actually happened. He's just he's bored, so he's making up a story, and then he has to like stop himself, like, no, that didn't, no, they're fine, everything's fine, so now as the audience we kind of be like, this kid okay, like what's going on with Abel?
Yeah, no, I love that. I love this, and we could do this all the way back at the beginning. Like if we back up to that opening sequence where he like wakes up in the tent, and like he sees the crossing guard, or the traffic cop, and he goes to school. Like we can put that in from the very, very beginning. Like he comes out of the tent, he's walking to school, he sees the traffic cop, who gives him shit, and then maybe like he looks at the cop who just gets fucking run over by like a car, or like smashed like a bus, like Regina George and Mean Girls, and then he like blinks his eyes and looks again. The guy's just sitting there talking to him like, well, like get on, go to school, and it's like, okay, so he had this little fantasy moment where he wanted this guy to die, and then the same thing, like he gets to school and maybe he's going through class to class, getting in trouble, telling these stories, explaining himself to his teachers, and at some point there's got to be like some bully or some mean student who's like, did you sleep in a compost heap last night, Abel? Like, holy shit, like look at you, like they're making fun of him, and then Abel looks at him again, and then like this bully, and then you see the bully like grab his throat and like choke, and bloody froth is coming out of his mouth, and he fucking just chokes on whatever, like has like a seizure and dies, and then of course he blinks, and like the guy is just sitting there laughing, and Abel walks away. So he's having these like fantasies, but the fantasies are all violent. It's like,
yes,
which again, just like you said, like he sees a guy who pulls out a gun, but no, he's really fine. So it's like he's making up all these stories in his head, but the stories that he's telling are maybe kind of innocent, but the stories that he's imagining are all really violent, and that's really going to drive home like, did he really see like this dog hammer guy like kill a dog, or is he just imagining that because he has these like sociopathic tendencies?
Love it. Love it. That is 100% what I was thinking with like having him be that red herring idea. But yeah, no, you just drove it home by like adding that from the get-go. I love it. So yes, Abel will definitely be that kid where it's almost like what was it, apt pupil, where the kid kept imagining worse and worse scenarios and then like he made
Mhm.
them happen, you
Yeah, yeah,
know.
with Brad Renfro and Ian McKellen. Yeah, that's a
Yes.
fucking
Oh
great
fuck.
movie.
Ooh, it's intense, man. Like that's a movie I haven't watched in a very long time. I need to revisit that because I remember it being a very intense psychological horror movie. I remember the short story. I remember reading that,
Mhm.
but but yeah, so anyway, so he's watching the neighborhood, he's watching all the people, and maybe like it could be something as simple as like the guy actually handing maybe a beer to his wife or something like that. But in Abel's mind, he sees him like reach down and like pull out a gun and shoot her, and he's like, "Oh God, no!" And he looks back in the binoculars again, and you actually see that he just like cracked open a can of beer and handed it to his wife. Like they're in the
Yep.
backyard grilling or something, and like Abel just kind of shakes
Mhm.
his head and keeps on looking around, and maybe like right after that scenario, because we just saw him clearly having a flight of fancy, he looks over and we see like a neighborhood dog, like in a backyard, sleeping like it's Butch, it's like a little bulldog or something, and he's
Mhm.
sleeping in a dog house, like very Americana, like just half ass in the dog house, head outside of the dog
Mhm.
house, sleeping, chained up. And we see someone at the corner of the house, like a shadowy figure, watching, like looking at the dog. And then like maybe like, Abel pans the binoculars over and we see him look down and we see the dog. Then he pans over and you see the shadowy figure looking at the dog. And then the shadowy figure like looks right at him.
Oh
And then
yeah,
Abel like
yeah.
looks away like, oh shit, no, and like climbs down the tree. So now we have to question, did that actually fucking happen, or is this kid still imagining things?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Okay. So let's ramp up the action a little bit. I think we've had a lot of
Hmm.
setup, and so yeah, let's. It's time for like the night of the slash or whatever.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, like the big deadly night you get in most of these slasher movies. So yeah, so let's have Abel like half fall and half climb out of this tree. Like he practically falls on Yeti, and then like they take off. They take off running toward this house where he thinks he just saw a dog hammer like on the corner in the shadows, and he runs over and he's like panting, and he runs up to like the chain link fence. It's like one of those fences that's like chest high, right? And he leans over and he's panting and he sees the dog still in the doghouse, but the dog kind of perks up and looks at him. And then maybe, the neighbor who lives there comes out the backyard and is just like, Butchie, you still out there? He's like, oh, it's getting dark. You got to come in, and the dog is
Hmm.
just like, the dog just goes back to sleep and immediately starts snoring. But maybe Abel, like when he sees the guy neighbor come out, he just kind of like ducks back himself into that dark area where we think he saw the killer like a minute ago. Like he's just trying to like, oh, let me get out of the way and not spook this neighbor into thinking I'm trying to murder his dog,
Right.
and then he backs up into the darkness and he's looking and he sees the dog kind of go back to sleep and the neighbor going, fuck that dog, I'll get him later, whatever. And then Yeti starts to growl, you know.
Oh shit. Okay.
Well, and Abel is just like, oh my God, like he realizes where he is. Like his eyes go wide. The camera's going to zoom in on his face and he's like sweat trickling down his nose and his eyes are bugging out. And maybe just have him slowly turn around and look into darkness, but there's nothing there, nothing that he can see. But now Yeti is growling. So there's something going on. Like maybe it's not just in Abel's head, but he doesn't see anything here, right? In the darkness right away.
Right. Oh
Um,
shit. Okay.
So at this point in the story, we have to make two decisions, and we've done this in the past. Where we've tried to improv like slasher stories where we end up kind of competing with each other to be like, no, I want to have my killer secretly be the slasher or whatever, right?
Right. Right.
So this time, let's just put it out there. I think as like screenwriters talking to each other, this is kind of like our aside, and we have to decide right now so that we can figure out the logistics. Is Abel the killer, and this is all in his head? And so that will tell us how to react to what's happening in the scene where Yeti's growling at the darkness, because he's growling at like the stray cat or something, right?
Right.
Or is Abel not the killer, and all this stuff in his head was a red herring because uh, Yeti is growling and a fucking like ball peen sledge is going to come swinging out of the darkness at him. Like I think these are the choices we have to pick one of these two.
Well, I mean, I will just go ahead and say, like, I don't have any plans. I was just kind of like going on for the ride here. So if you have a specific idea in mind, I mean, I say go for it since it's your story. But at the same time, I don't know. I kind of like the idea of Abel being the killer and not knowing it, but that's hard to pull off because, like, movies like Identity and High Tension have done it and done it badly. Um, so it is kind of hard to pull off, but I don't know. What are your thoughts?
So what I'm thinking is let's do something different than my original story. And we've made a lot of changes to the original concept. This is the, alternate reality version. So in my original story, there is a guy called Doghammer. He really does kill dogs, but we never find out who it is. Like that's kind of the twist in the graphic novel version is, yeah, he's a dog murderer. And maybe that's not the most original thing. Maybe it's been done before. I don't know. But in order to sort of like layer up as much originality as I could, my idea was that he gets away with it. They never find out who he is. They don't stop him. And then Abel is like kind of haunted for his whole life, thinking that maybe someday Doghammer will come back for revenge because Abel tried to stop him. That's kind of what the graphic novel story is about, is Abel stumbles across this guy killing an actual dog, and then Abel, or in the story, Abel tries to stop him. Doghammer kills Yeti, and then Abel goes on the John Wick mission to fucking kill this motherfucker who killed my dog. And he gets like weapons, like makeshift weapons from like the neighbors' backyards, like axes and arrows and whatever he can kind of scrummage up. And he goes after Doghammer and fails. And so like the sequel that takes place in the modern day is like years later, and he's never gotten over it, and he has this like trauma from decades ago that even he's been married and divorced and has kids, and his kids are kind of fucked up from their own experiences because he has this PTSD for his whole life. Obviously we're not doing that here.
I was gonna say I kind of love that actually.
I mean, we could totally do it, and I just like gave it away, and we could just fill in the gaps, and that's fine. Or we could do the thing where it's like, no, it's really him the whole time, and we could have this like confrontation where he is fighting Doghammer or chasing him or whatever. But again, because we've seen him have these like sort of fantasy hallucinations the whole time, it's like he thinks he's on this like mission, like, oh, I'm the hero of the town, I'm going to stop Doghammer, and he's like almost like subconsciously pretending that he's having this confrontation that doesn't ever actually happen. And like toward the end of the story, like maybe he, again, I don't want to completely ruin everything and jump to the end, but like maybe he like finally catches quote unquote Doghammer and like hurts him, stops him, kills him, whatever. But it was actually like somebody else, one of the other characters that we've met in the story so far, that he, in his sociopathic hallucination, kind of accidentally kills.
Okay. Ooh, this is tough because there's 3 really good options on the table here, and I don't know which one is the best option to pick.
Oh, dude, we don't have to choose our own adventure. Let's do them all. Let's go.
Okay. I why not? Okay, because here's what I was thinking initially, like the concept of it being Abel, like us thinking that it's a red herring and it being Abel. So my thought was like, because I was going to suggest having Yeti get killed by the Doghammer only to find out that Abel was the Doghammer. So the idea being like we do the thing where maybe like so let's back up to the growling in the shadows. So Yeti's growling, Abel can't see what's happening, and he's like, come on boy, let's get out of here, and like they run off, dog's growling, and it could have been something as simple as a cat. Like maybe we even see that, like maybe when they're running away we see like a cat like come out of the bushes and run in the other direction. So maybe that's what Yeti was growling at. Or hell, we could even do something like where we see the cat run in the other direction and then just make it look like something moves in the shadows. So maybe there's a question of, was it a person there? Like what's going on? But we could do the whole thing where Abel goes on the crusade of I'm gonna stop him, and gets his weapons together. We do the montage scene. He's waiting up for the dog hammer. Maybe he like sees what he thinks is the dog hammer, like going into the neighbor's yard. So he rushes in, jumps on him, like starts fighting with him. In the melee, Yeti gets killed. Like Yeti gets struck by the hammer. And then have Abel freaking out and wrestling with somebody, and then have it just like kind of click. He's wrestling with nobody. Like he's like punching the ground. And then like he looks up and he's covered in blood, and in his other hand he's holding the hammer.
Oh shit.
So it's like, oh fuck, like Abel was the killer.
Yeah. I love that. Or we can kind of introduce this element of like, oh fuck, like Abel was the dog hammer killer. Do we want to like drive it home to like make it even worse, where he's having this sort of like struggle? Maybe he like rolls to the side and jumps back up and like there's nobody there. And then he sees like the dog hammer ran off and he's looking around like, where'd he go? And he sees movement down the street and he takes off running. And, he's like, and he's just yelling, screaming like, oh, you killed my dog, but whatever. Like he's having this like emotional panic moment. And he runs up to this figure that he sees in the darkness and he just like jumps on him and starts wailing on him. Like those scenes in a movie when like when Ralphie jumps on, like Scott Farkas and he's just wailing on him. Right. And he's like wailing on this guy, like, rasm frasm, whatever. And then he stops in a and he breathes like, okay, I did it. And then he looks down and it wasn't like some random guy. It was like Frankie, or it was Rooney, one of the other characters we'd met earlier in the story. And he's like, oh my God, like what happened? And then like, we were seeing him like punch somebody, but then Abel like looks at his hands and they're bloody, and one of them is a fist and the other one's a fucking hammer. And he had like chased this person down and jumped on him, imagining that he was fighting the dog hammer, but really he had just pummeled like a real person with a fucking 3-pound ball peen.
Oh shit. And I think it would make the most sense if it was the homeless guy. Like, yeah. I feel like that because he would be out in the woods, He has a dog, so.
Oh, dude. And right as this happens, like you're hearing, it's that weird like audio cue where it's like this high pitched, like muffled squeal. And like Abel's kind of looking around like, oh my God, what did I do? And you hear this barking kind of coming through the fuzz, bark, bark, bark. And then Abel, like, he snaps to a clear head and fucking Yeti is sitting there barking at him. Right. Like Yeti was never killed. Like he imagined the whole thing and he goes and he kills this homeless guy because all of this shit was in his head.
Okay. I dig it. I think that's really fucking good.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Like we like the dog is barking at him, and like Abel's just panicking. He's covered in blood, and maybe you see like cop, the red and blue lights start shining because somebody called the cops, and the neighbors are coming out in their like bathrobes, and they're like, oh my God, like what happened? Like who is that? Oh, that's poor Donna's kid. Like someone go to the hotel and get her or whatever. And it's like, oh shit, and we can just kind of fade to black from there. Like story's over,
Right.
Or we jump back, like choose our own adventure, and we're back into the alley, and Yeti's growling at like something in the darkness. We don't know what it is, and now we could do a version of the story where there really was a guy in the darkness who is about to swing at him with a fucking hammer. And where does that ending go instead?
Okay, all right. I kind of have a thing where I want to mix all three together. I got an idea here.
Okay.
So we back up, and it's very much like Clue. So we back like, or it could have happened like this. So yes, exactly. we back up to the Abel in the shadows, like watching Butch in the yard. The guy comes out, Abel backs up. We hear Yeti start growling. Abel freaks out, thinking, oh shit, there is something in the shadows. Grabs Yeti. He's like, come on, boy, let's go. And they take off running. And we pan down to the bushes, and we see a cat run away, and we're like, oh, it's just a cat. But then we see like a work boot and like dirty jeans like step out of the shadows. So there was somebody there, and then they start walking in the direction that Abel, ran in. So maybe we could have him like hiding out in his tent, being like, we got to do something. Like, he's out there, and he's like kind of freaking. He's like, no one's going to believe me. Right. He's like, everyone thinks I'm full of shit. And it's like, we're going to have to fight him ourselves. So, do the whole gearing up montage like we talked about. Now have nearby in the woods, we hear a dog yelp. Oh, so he runs out there. We see a shadowy figure in the woods by like a campfire, and we see them hunched over a dead dog, and it's the homeless guy's dog. So Abel runs out and attacks. He's like, I'm going to stop you. Just jumps on him, starts beating the shit out of this person with a hammer. Like is like beating him up. And when he finally calms down, we see that he was beating the fuck out of the homeless dude. He was killing the homeless guy, but we see the homeless guy's dog is laying there dead. And we're fast forward. We do everything like you said. Like he gets arrested, the cops are involved, all that. We have like he gets arrested. He murdered the homeless guy, and he's like, no, I stopped the dog hammer. I stopped like his dog was dead. And then like we pan out and we see like what actually happened, and maybe it was like the dog hammer killed the homeless guy's dog and then was watching from the woods as the owner was like crying over his dead dog, and then here comes Abel running out of the woods to attack what he thinks is the killer. Turns out he killed the innocent victim and then gets arrested for it, and the killer still walks free.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. And like, so this could go in two different directions. We could stop the story right there, and it kind of goes back to the original concept that I had, where it's like we never find out who it is. Like that's it. Like you don't get the satisfaction of knowing. I'm sorry, in this story, like sometimes in real life, like there is no nice clean ending. Like Abel is in trouble and he has these sociopathic thoughts and he lies to everybody. Like he's a compulsive liar and everybody knows it, and no one's going to believe anything he says. Of course they're going to believe that he was the one killing dogs. Like he's the guy whose dad was killed and whose mom's never home, who fucking lives in the woods. Of course he's a weirdo who kills little animals, right? That's what sociopaths do. So that could be one ending, but then we could tack on a third ending, which is like all of that stuff happens, and then maybe there's a scene where like Abel's he's in the jail and he's crying, and like the cops don't believe him, and maybe he starts hearing this bark, and it's this very distinctive bark outside, like Yeti, that's Yeti, Yeti's outside, and he starts yelling at these cops like, guys, let Yeti in, like don't let the dog hammer get Yeti, and they're like, yeah kid, like you're the dog hammer, like we'll find your dog, it'll be okay, and then maybe one of the cops like goes to open the front door to like let the dog in, and then they just hear that yelp again, like holy shit, like the dog hammer is right outside the building and killed the dog, and then one of the cops is like, what the hell, and like puts his hand on his revolver and like runs out the door, and we gotta Abel wasn't in the jail cell. Maybe he's just like sitting there, like in cuffs at like one of the tables being like interviewed by the cops, because I don't want to have him behind bars. But the cops go outside to find whatever, and this is where Abel is going to be like, fuck this, and he jumps up, like cuffs still behind him, and he like runs out the door, and he runs out and he sees the cop who finds like poor Yeti's body on the sidewalk, like no killer around, and the cop sees Abel and is like, hey, wait a second, holy shit, stop, the cops are coming out. And he just fucking takes off. He takes off running, and he runs to Frankie's little like workshop she had in the back, because she had all those weapons and stuff, right? And so he finds like something to like maybe there was like a grinding stone or an axe or something to like smash the cuffs off. Let's just get the cuffs off. And he grabs I mentioned like a bow and arrow. Like he grabs the bow and arrow, or he grabs an axe or something, like, and now he's just in a rage, like screaming, crying, blubbering, like snot coming out of his nose, and he runs off down the street with like an axe or like a bow and arrow and like, broken cuffs hanging off of his wrists. And it's like, he doesn't even know where he's going, but like, he's panicking and he's going to go find this killer. And maybe he does. Maybe while he's running, this figure steps out of like a dark alley and just stops right in front of him and stares. And all you see, he's wearing this like hood and you can't see his face, but he has this big fucking hammer, like Denzel Washington in The Equalizer, this big hammer. And,
right.
Abel pulls up short and he's crying. He's like, you killed my dog. Oh my God, you killed Eddie. And he's like, he can't think straight. And he's trying to pull back the bow and he drops the arrow or the axe or whatever the weapon is. It's like he's fumbling with it while he's trying to fight with this killer. And then the killer just like turns and walks back into the alley. Abel tries to chase him, and like any good slasher, he's gone. That's it. He's just fucking gone.
Shit. See, that reminds me of the ending of Hellfest, and that's one of, like, I know people shit all over that movie, but it's one of my favorite Halloween slashers because we don't know who the killer is. We never find out who the killer is. And at the end of the movie, it's like the killer returns to a house in suburbia with a kid, like, and he hides his trophies in his little trophy closet, and that's it. And it's like, oh shit, like what's no one ever caught the guy. Like I love those type of ending. I think it's solid.
Yeah, man, thanks. I think what you added was awesome because again, in my original version, without going into too much of the detail, the idea was just that it's sort of a John Wick type of a story that I came up with years before I saw John Wick, unfortunately, and I had to kind of adapt the story. But yeah, it's like in my version, Yeti gets killed early on, and then Abel, who in this version is not a hallucinating like compulsive liar, who has sociopathic tendencies. He's actually like a tough like streetwise kid who's had to grow up too fast, and so in his world he's like, you killed my dog, I kill you. And he literally hunts the slasher. Like that's really what the story is about, is like the slasher was killing people and he turns the table and says, no, I'm gonna hunt you, like I'll be the slasher, I'm gonna slash the slasher. But of course, the twist ending is that he has a similar confrontation at the end here, where they confront each other, but then Doghammer gets away and disappears forever. And it's like, fuck, like I had him in my hands, he was right here, and it was. But anyway, I really like this version because now we have these really cool choose your own adventure endings, which I think is really fun.
It turned into Clue halfway through, but it's fun.
I hope you had fun with it because it was definitely fun for me to kind of reimagine this thing that's been living in my head for a long time.
Oh, absolutely. I honestly would have loved to do like more in the middle, but I knew we were on a time crunch tonight, so we kind of had to jump through. But yeah, no, I feel like there's more meat on the bone for this, and we could possibly come back to this at a later date and do more with like what happens next to Abel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be really fun. Like I said, in my version, the story that I really wanted to tell wasn't even really about Abel. When I came up with this originally, this idea I had for Abel and the Doghammer Killer, it was a short story. It was like a 6 or 8 page comic idea. But the real story that I told was years later. It was modern day at the time I came up with it. But Abel has tween age kids. He's divorced. He has these 3 daughters. And he's always been this like survivalist camper, like living in the woods. And he really leaned into that later on in life. And now post divorce, he wants to take his kids out into the woods and show them like what he likes to do. Like, instead of living in the suburbs with his wife, he's like, I'm going to take you camping for real this time, like real camping, like no tents, no sleeping bags, no cabin. Like, I'm going to really show you what the woods is like. And it does not go well for them, because he's had this trauma in his life this whole time. And I won't get into the detail too much, but yeah, that was what the story was really about. It's about his daughter Mavis, and she's the main character. And he was sort of like my crazy dad, who had a Nev Campbell type slasher run in years ago that he never got over.
Right.
But I think this is fun because we told this story in a different way. So yeah, if we were to revisit this, we could kind of pick one of the endings and then do the same thing. Like, okay, yeah, decades later, what happened to Abel? Like, does he have a family? Did he survive? Is he in jail? Like, where does it go from here? And I think there's definitely some interesting possibilities.
100%. There's definitely more meat on the bone. Like I would love to revisit this. And this is something that we talked about at the start of the year. Or was it the end of it might have been our end of the year roundup in December, but about doing more original concepts this year. And so we definitely do want to do more stuff like this. So hopefully the listeners are digging on this. We've gotten a lot of good feedback in the past on our original stories. Like I know both Vengabus and Hot Garbage got a shitload of great feedback, and our Whose Improv Is It Anyway got a ton of great feedback. So, I mean, hopefully people dig this because I think this is more fun. Like, don't get me wrong. I love doing the, improve episodes like Cobra 2 or the Jay and Silent Bob Meet Frankenstein. Like, those are always a blast, and I always have fun doing them. But the original stories that's mainly how we started working together in the first place, was writing stories together for comic books. So I feel like this is a much needed creative outlet for that. So hopefully everybody digs it, and definitely give us some feedback, guys. Like, let us know what you think, because I want to do more.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. Yeah. Like to your point, I love riffing on pop culture concept. I mean, that's the meat and potatoes of this podcast. And we have a ton of fun, especially that last one we did with RoboCop. And that was a high point, at least for this season, I think.
Yeah. Oh my God. I think that the best review I got was it was fucking amazing, and then you added a monkey, and it was awesome.
Yeah, I heard that too. That was so good. I definitely appreciate the love on those. But yeah, actually, it was in both episodes, both our year-end review and our first episode of this season, the Jay and Silent Bob Meet Frankenstein, where we talked about doing more originals in 2024 and in season 3. So yeah, already we've done the Flapjack Massacre, and now we've done this one. And our next episode, Mike, it'll be your turn to bring an idea to the table. And like I said earlier, when I first queued this up to you a couple weeks ago, it was like, here are the rules. Like, make it a trigger warning, make it some old idea that you never finished. I'm going to say, you know what? Just have some kind of a trigger warning in the story so that the series title makes sense. And other than that, just bring an idea to the table. Don't tell me anything about it. It'll just be completely fresh and new for me. We'll improv something next time. Doesn't have to be horror. It can be whatever. And yeah, I'm already looking forward to it.
Well, I mean, it probably will be horror, knowing me, because that seems to be like just my comfort food when it comes to writing and entertainment. What am I talking about? It's my comfort food in general. But I will definitely have something. I don't know what it'll be yet, so I will probably be just as surprised as you are, but with what I bring to the table. I'm definitely excited. So
yeah, that's awesome. I know. I think that's great. Yeah, I think the most improv we can do, the better it is. Like I said, this one, I think it was obvious at the beginning. It was a little bit awkward because I was like, oh, I have all these details and I have all these ideas and like I know exactly what I want to do. And you were just kind of like, okay, yeah, sure. But
let's run with it.
But as soon as we got into like the real meat and we started actually like riffing, it was like, okay, cool. Now you found a hook to get into the story. You got excited. I got even more excited, and the story went in a completely weird direction than what I had originally planned. You know, to the point where there were times while we were talking, and I'm like, "Shit! Like this is better than my idea. Maybe I should change my graphic novel script. Like this is really good." You know,
Right.
But that's part of why I wanted to do this. Again, it was like I had this writer's block with this particular idea for a while where I know what I wanted to do, but I just couldn't quite like crack a couple of the details. And so it was like, you know what, let's just have some fun with it. Just completely have fun. And I can still do my version the way that I always intended without using any of these, but this podcast story is still its own thing. It's its own oral, presentation. And so, yeah, I mean, the story that you have, even if you end up writing it the way that you had originally intended to, we can still bring it to the podcast and let's just fuck around with it. Just have fun. I mean, just like we do with like the pop culture movies. It's like RoboCop still exists, even though like we fucked around with it.
Right. Well, and it's also I always forget his name, but the guy who made Trick or Treat and Krampus, he was doing stories with Sam for years. Like he did a little like PSA kind of cartoon with him. He had done a couple like little like newspaper strip stories with him. Like Sam wasn't fully fleshed out. So like the movie Trick or Treat like fleshes out Sam. But then there was all these other like little ancillary things that he had been playing with for years with that character. So this is something I feel like a lot of writers do where they have a story in their head and they're like, well, what if? And you kind of play with it in different ways. Even if you put it out there into the world, like it's not the definitive answer. I mean, hell, even like Eastman and Laird did that with the Ninja Turtles. Like they did all sorts of crazy, wacky stuff with the Ninja Turtles under the Mirage comics, and then Archie comics went in a completely different way, and then the cartoon went in a completely different way, and the movies went in a completely different way, and then they went back to the comic books and they're like, fuck it, let's kill people, let's go in a different way now. And so like you can tell multiple stories with the same concept and just be like, this is a new version of it, deal with it. So
yeah totally.
It's a thing writers do, so I'm totally down. And I will tease this here, and I haven't even told you about this yet. But I did come up with an idea for the Vanga Bus Returns.
All right, I'm putting it on the list.
So I'm just throwing that out there that maybe sometime in the summer the Vanga Bus of Death could come back for round 2. Just saying.
I'm putting it on the list right now. Not just on the idea list, but I'm putting it on the schedule because I have a schedule of like 4 episodes that we know we're for sure going to do, but just not exactly like in what order or what dates we're going to record them. But that's where it's going.
It was so funny because I was sitting at work and I was thinking about our original ideas because I knew this one was coming up and I was like, well, what else have we touched on? I was going through and I kept coming back to Hot Garbage and Vangabus and like giggling to myself. And then I had one of those like what if moments and I was like, oh shit, yeah, we could play with that. Then it was like, do we want to do a sequel to the Vagabus? Like, so it's there. There's an idea for it.
Well, in the grand tradition of 80s and 90s and even early 2000s horror, I mean, we have to do a sequel or a remake or a requel or a prequel or something, or it just won't be appropriate to the era, right?
Exactly.
I don't know that I can come up with a sequel to Hot Garbage. I don't know. Some things just exist in their own little world, but I can certainly come up with something similar. There's something about like dirty 1980s New York that just gives me so many ideas for creepy stories.
Oh, fuck yeah, dude. And honestly, right off the top of my head, if we wanted to do a new Hot Garbage story, I would say that we could do a prequel to explain where the garbage deity came from. Show the dumpster throughout time.
And the first thing I think of is the Valley of Gehenna outside of Jerusalem. That was like the garbage pit where they burned the garbage, and it was like
Yes.
at the bottom of like Calvary Hill where Jesus was crucified. It's the same origin as like the Golgothan shit demon from
Yes.
Dogma.
Dude, that would be fucking hilarious.
So yeah, let's wrap it up. I appreciate it, Mike. Thanks for coming along for the ride. I'm super excited we did this because I think it gave new life to a story that I'm even more excited about, like finishing in its final form, whatever that form may take. But now I can get out in the world. So thanks everyone for listening and tuning in once again to the Raised by Rentals program. You can find us online at raisedbyrentals.com or at Raised by Rentals on the socials. We belong to the Rad Pantheon, a super team of podcasters, artists, musicians, all sorts of creative friends supporting each other to help spread the word about rad stuff. Definitely go check out radpantheon.com to see at least one new link that I put up there. I'll let you go find out what it is. So you go and check it out, radpantheon.com. What about you, Mike? What do you got going on?
Not a whole heck of a lot at the moment. Still got stuff in the works for the future. By the time you hear this, hopefully the Boogeyman's Closet 5th anniversary episode will be out. I know we're still technically on hiatus, but we have the anniversary episode. Still doing Count Creepyhead Saturday Morning Monster Mash, where 3 grown men children complain about pop culture and talk about toys. That will be taking some weird turns coming up because Hibbard just got a house, so congratulations to him and his partner Ruth. That was freaking awesome, and it looks like a beautiful home. So he's going to be taking a small hiatus, but we're going to have guests and fun games and other stuff that me and Mike are planning for the time that Josh can't join us. And then after that, it's just conventions and other stuff I got planned for the summer. So there'll be a lot of stuff on my Instagram if you guys aren't following me. So check out Zarakis on Instagram, Zaracis, to keep up with artwork and podcasts and stuff. I will be posting a lot of stuff as soon as I can share it.
Awesome. Yeah, can't wait for it. Looking forward to the summer and con season and all kinds of cool stuff going on with you and Western New York Horror Crew and all kinds of other people in the Rad Pantheon. I won't go through the whole list right now because people should go check out radpantheon.com. But in the meantime, if you had fun with us, visit us on the socials, drop us a line, leave a comment, leave a podcast rating, and let us know what you think we should improve next time. And with that, I'm Josh.
I'm Mike.
And we have to return some videotapes. Raised by Rentals is a member of the Rad Pantheon Network. Visit radpantheon.com to support rad stuff. The theme music is Forbidden Fruit by Velvet Bethany. You can purchase music and learn more at velvetbethany.com.
What'd you do to my dog, you asshole?